On behalf of the captain and the crew, we'd like to welcome you on board Flight 072, now departing to the world of complicated connections. Cabin crew, arm doors, and cross-check.
Thank you for listening to us today. If this is the first time listening to this podcast, welcome aboard. If you're a returning listener, we're glad you're back. Seat 1A provides tips and tricks from more than 5 million miles worth of flying to help you take off from the crowd.
In today's experience recorded on the 25th of April, 2023, we're going to take a look at what it takes to get around the world through all the various different airports at a reasonable price and where that all started from in the past.
And then we'll wrap up with a discussion about current events in the world of aviation. So, lots of people flying this summer and lots of people going online, checking prices, and direct flights are rather dear and expensive in many cases these days. And so many people are looking for alternate ways to save some dollars.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm currently in that phase right now, trying to figure out family travel plans for this summer. It is not cheap. I don't know what's happened. Maybe the reduced capacity, the restrictions from the airport, that's all still part of the equation, but the prices are just astronomical for routes that, have a sort of typical price marker. And it seems like the only way to drive that price down or, try and do something to be able to afford it is to start going on these like milk run wild circuit flights to get from A to B via 8.1.2.3. Yes, exactly. All in the middle. It's just bizarre. So yeah, it kind of reminds me of the old way to travel when, aircraft didn't have the range that they did. And it forced you to stop in places. That was just part of the norm. But now I think, with the power of the internet, we all know too much. And so when you're going to book a flight, it's not like when you went to the travel agent and said, I need to go from London to Singapore. And they would say, yes, here's your ticket. And you're like, okay, I'm now going from London with a stop at Abu Dhabi and then on to Singapore. And that's just the way it is. But you kind of welcome it because planes were a lot slower then. And it was just a different experience. Now, like I said, too much info. It's a fascinating time. You see all the details, the amount of travel time, the amount of layover, the gate connection time,
the reputation on how on time this flight normally is.
Yeah. And depending on which site, it can either like freak you out or give you justification. Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at Google Flights and then the ITA Matrix or Momondo and Skyscanner, all the whole gamut of them. And it's very inconsistent across the board as to which is which.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of these things have also led to interesting changes in the way that, people lay over. Like before it may have been, I got to stay here or I'm going to change here. And now it's like, well, if I'm going to change here, I get a day or two included and then I can continue on.
Exactly. And I mean, that's one of the cool parts is saying the, airlines and economic and tourism boards of various countries have embraced that. Because I think before no one really thought, I guess because the flight was just so bloody long.
And ticket pricing and rules and things. I mean, it was like you're locked in, you're flying this, you're flying back and no interruptions. And if you do interrupt, it's going to cost you 75% more or, no one-way flights. Like you have to book and, are you booking weekends, blah, blah, blah. So,
yeah. Well, some of the major carriers did, and I think we touched on this before. We talked about an episode where my father and I would stop in Hong Kong.
Yes, and stay at the Elizabeth Hotel?
The Kimberly.
The Kimberly Hotel, yeah.
Yeah. But that was paid for by the airline. because that's just the way the schedules ran. Is you had to have enough of a layover that you need to go to a hotel.
Yeah.
But now, does the airline even care? Well, I think if you accept the ticket as is with the long layover, especially if you're going to start buying from these third party sites, then
Hmm.
you're on your own. You're not
Yeah.
getting hotel provided. Dubai is certainly still into that mode, and with the whole shop over experience, um, which is great. And some, it's put them on the map. I think you mentioned that one
Exactly.
earlier. Iceland, like there was never, I think growing up, Iceland was one of those far away, removed fairy tale kind of Disney
Yeah.
type
There's
places.
volcanoes and Vikings or something.
Yeah, exactly. Muskox running around. Now, at least in the
And
North American
puffins.
market. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. In the North American market now, Iceland is just it's a common destination because they did this huge push.
Well, certain TV shows definitely helped out as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think the airline made it clear that it's only, well, depending where you're coming out of, 5 to 6 hours to get to
Pretty much from
Reykjavik,
anywhere in North America to Iceland.
and then another 2 to 3 to get to most of your
Yeah, a
European
little
gateways.
3 to 4,
Maybe,
I think,
maybe a
but
bit more. Yeah,
two to
more the
four.
UK.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they really started pushing this. Well, since you're coming to Iceland anyway, why don't you explore? And
yeah.
yeah,
Get
I've
out
done
for a
it.
few days and
Exactly.
enjoy, a thermal spring or a shark fin or
Yeah, or the $12 hot dog because Iceland is just not a cheap place.
yes.
Yeah. Yes, you may be able to do the stopover. It might go bankrupt in the process. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. Yeah. So, in looking for flights, these milk runs just start showing up. And when you start then looking at the airline website directly and try and match, sometimes you can't even find it
Hmm.
because either the airline puts a like a restriction or it doesn't want to offer you a really awkward
And
connection.
in some cases, it's like, yeah, because I was trying it this year, and it was like, well, on the Air Canada site, for example, they're like, well, we can't book flights that are starting and ending outside of Canada. Like, if there's no Canadian connection in it, we can't book it for you. So if I'm trying to
Interesting.
book, say, like Frankfurt to Istanbul or something, Air Canada's like, yeah, we're done here because we're not involved, even though our partners are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's no like common central Star Alliance booking engine anywhere
That's true. Yeah.
in that sense. Actually, I mean, in June, I have a business trip to London, Ontario, not London, UK, unfortunately. And part of that is to come back. I want to stop in Toronto and um, do a work visit to a venue. And one of the strategies was to fly from London, Ontario to Toronto, have a long layover, like I don't know, 9 hour layover, and then continue on. But on the site,
You can't
it's
force it
impossible to
very
buy.
easily, right?
Yeah, you'd have to claim it as a multi city and then patch two fares together versus one
Mhm.
through fare with a long layover. It just doesn't offer it. It's kind of a conundrum because the system thinks that that is just so abnormal that it's not going to offer it to
Yeah.
you.
And it's inconvenient. And goodness, no, we don't want to give you an inconvenient ticket.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Although in other ways they will.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, there some milk runs have been pretty cool. And the one that comes to mind, which I did a few times, is the Hawaii Interchange that used to exist. So before the inception of, a 787, a 777-200 LR, aircraft that could do Australia to the Pacific Rim. Pretty
Yeah.
much everything you had to go through Hawaii to make that connection.
Yeah. I was always like, yeah, you're flying from Vancouver, you're stopping in Fiji, you're stopping in Hawaii.
Yeah. So it was quite fascinating. I remember the first time, again, my late father and I, we were going to Auckland, I believe. So we did the Vancouver to Honolulu run. And this is like on the classic Canadian Airlines DC-10. Um,
Good silver and orange.
no, well, yes, it would have been. I guess I flew
Oh,
on
Canadian
the,
Airlines, not CP. Yeah.
yeah, on the blue.
Yeah.
And you would get into Honolulu at about, it was an off hour, midnight. one something dark.
Hmm.
And every other connection plane would be there. So then we then hopped on a flight. There'd be a flight to Auckland, there'd be a flight to Sydney, maybe one to Melbourne, who knows. And it wouldn't just be, our flight from Vancouver, but other feeder flights would be coming in. And the airport was just banging for these like 3 hours. And this was like, because it was the US and this pre-clearance, basically they said everyone needs to get off the plane, pick up their luggage, recheck in, and go through the whole hoopla again.
Oh boy.
Or sorry, not recheck in, but go through security.
Hmm.
So you have to do a full luggage transfer because there were so many different connection possibilities. And again, this is talking in the days before scanner gun technology came in.
Ah, yes.
Or luggage tags, right? It was kind of more manual, and you're handing it to a human that says, right, this is going to the right belt. Thank you. I will put it on.
Yeah.
Right?
Let me
Versus a
read the three
computer,
letters
sorry.
and away we go.
Yeah, versus in a baggage belt system getting scanned and it gets bounced around
And
and thrown
bounce
to the
around
right chute.
automatically, right?
Yeah. So we'd land, and you'd have to, you couldn't lollygag, but you didn't have to like run like an athlete.
Race.
Like
Yeah.
they didn't have time. So you go, you get your bag, you put it on the right connection belt, you go back up, you go through security, and you go back to the gate area, and then again, hundreds of people and seemingly chaos. And again, the planes that we were getting on had brought people in as well.
Mhm.
So it was a two-way thing. And then you'd have to really listen carefully for your boarding and your gates, because everyone would be kind of all calling around the same time, and all the planes would load up and poof, we'd
They'd all
all
disappear
essentially
again.
depart within about a half hour of each other. And that's how you
So it
flew. And then
wasn't a
you
case of where you could like land and go to a restaurant and order a meal and then go catch your plane. It's like, yeah, get moving kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. And it wasn't the type of situation where you could land, stay on the plane, and they would load, because that wasn't what was happening.
Because I mean, it wasn't your plane going on to Auckland or Brisbane or
Correct.
Melbourne or whatever, right? So
Yeah. So it'd be different combinations. Like the one time we did it, Canadian Airlines actually had a aircraft just circulating between Auckland and Honolulu
oh
on
wow.
its own. Yeah, yeah. So there would be a Canadian Airlines medal in Auckland.
Yeah, Fifth Freedom.
So I don't know if they sold it like that or if that was just how they broke it
Just
up.
how it worked, yeah.
Yeah. And another time we did a Air New Zealand medal out. But then I also remember seeing a Qantas plane there. So it's quite an interesting.
I'm gonna guess that you wouldn't have been able to book the Canadian Airlines only from Auckland to Honolulu. You would
No.
have needed to book it the whole way.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the one, I think when the Star Alliance really came into force, we did Air New Zealand, Auckland to Honolulu, and then Air Canada, Honolulu to Vancouver.
Vancouver. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, back to where we're going with this. That was a thing of the past where that was the only way to go, and it was accepted. It was this norm. Now with technology and the range of aircraft,
Yeah.
that's all kind of gone by the wayside. So you make conscious decisions to do these complicated connections. But I remember you were saying one that it was a mandatory.
Yeah, I mean,
it
was not necessarily long distance flights, but I was in northern Norway about 10 years ago, and Widerøe is a Norwegian airline, and it's the largest regional airline in the Nordic countries. And what it has is it has public service obligation flights. So essentially providing air service to remote communities. So what happens is it's like you're in a Dash 8 and it was free seating, which was awesome. But essentially you start in a city and then you fly for 20, 30 minutes and you land on another one. And then you just keep moving your way, starting in Tromsø, working your way through places like Alta and Hammerfest, and then ending up, say, in Vardø, like the very, very, very far northeastern part of Norway. But it's like every little stop along the way, it's doing it. And as you go down the coast, it's like that's how it's going up and down the coast of Norway.
Yeah, it's almost like a ferry.
Pretty much. I mean, I
stops.
took the Hurtigruten as well in Norway by boat, and I'm like, yeah, this is pretty much the same except by plane.
Yeah. And I guess I remember like the only thing that starts to get annoying is not necessarily the flying, the takeoff of the landings. I mean, for us avies, that's always fun. It's just listening to all the announcements and the safety demos
Hmm.
over and over and over again.
But I'm sure it's the same. Like I've never done Northern Canadian runs, but I'm sure, like Air North or Calm Air or whatever, going up in Canada, doing all those flights in the Northern Arctic archipelago in Canada, same sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a style of flights. It's called double stop. I mean, I guess you could have a triple stop, where you kind of operate it like a triangle.
Hmm.
And we've touched on that a few times and kind of go into depth. And they do still exist, and you can sometimes snag a bargain depending how you attack, put yourself onto the route. And can you get off when you're not supposed to if you don't have luggage in theory? So what it simply is a plane goes from A to B to C and back to A,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't go A to B to C, back to B, back to
Well, I'm
A.
doing one of those in about a month.
Yes, you are. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's like saying an open job, but not quite.
Yeah.
Um, and we used to when I did ground service handling for the charter world, Sky Service, Air Transat, they would be famous for doing these flights from Canada to say Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, across over to say Montego Bay,
Hmm.
and then back up. Or they do Punta Cana and Puerto Plata. Both are resort cities in Dominican Republic. So half the plane, when you send the plane out of Canada, let's say it's half and half for each destination, would land in destination one, drop off, pick up half that are coming home,
Yeah.
go to destination two, drop off the rest, pick up the rest, and then come home as a combined load.
Yeah.
And that, so when you mentioned the northern route, that's full of those, tons of
Yeah.
those. It's famous.
Rankin and Hall Beach and all of these small northern communities in Canada. So,
Yeah. And we mentioned Martinair a few times, Dutch charter airline that doesn't exist. And I used to work for them and it was a station manager for them when they would do the Edmonton Calgary double stop.
yeah.
But I mean, because they're Dutch, they would keep things interesting. On a certain day of the week, it was Amsterdam, Edmonton, Calgary, Amsterdam. And then the next day of the week, it'd be Amsterdam, Calgary, Edmonton,
Hmm.
Amsterdam.
Well, during COVID, that was a situation with KLM because Calgary was the international airport that allowed travelers during COVID to arrive.
Mm.
So KLM would fly into Calgary, do the hour flight to Edmonton, and then back to Amsterdam. But it wouldn't flip because Edmonton was not designated by the Canadian government to accept international passengers during COVID.
So there was no offload in Edmonton.
No, I mean, yeah, there was no offload because it was like, yeah, you're just picking up more passengers.
Right.
Oh, but might have
So,
been. No, actually, no, it wouldn't have been because Calgary would have been where everybody. How did it go? No, people had to clear
people
in
had to
Calgary,
clear. Exactly.
and then if they were getting off in Edmonton, then they would
Get back on for the
get
flight.
back on and fly for the hour, and then get let out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Or the you're talking about like routes that are doing it. I'm thinking of like the Pacific Island Hopper with the old Continental Micronesia now owned by United, where you start in Honolulu and eventually you end up in either Guam or Tokyo.
I saw that plane.
I know
Yes.
this
I
is
remember we
exactly where I
talked
was
about
going with
that.
this. Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
you message me, you're like, "What's a 737 doing on the runway for United
In Tokyo.
in Tokyo?" And I'm like, "It's
Yeah.
probably this one."
That's right. It kind of threw me for a loop. I remember we pulled in, and this is during 2021, so height of pandemic. Yeah, I remember I looked out the window. I'm like, United Airlines 737-800. What? Let's go. Huh? Weird.
Yeah, that came from San Francisco. Yeah,
Yeah, the long way around.
yeah.
Some airlines have kind of embraced it still and keep it running. Well, I think this one doesn't run, but at least up to the pandemic. Cathay 888.
Hmm.
So they would do Hong Kong, Vancouver, JFK, and then with the
That was a
stop in
classic
Vancouver on the way
route. I
back.
mean, if you wanted a nice flight from Vancouver to JFK.
Oh, it was great. I did that a couple times when I had my standby passes, and they would run the 777-300. So it was beautiful, and they had Fifth Freedom, so people were buying JFK YVR or vice versa all the time. Now, clearly, 777-300 can easily do Hong Kong to JFK. That's not an
Mhm.
issue. But they kept this route as an interesting service point. They actually had so much activity on that they had a crew base in Vancouver. So you could be a Cathay Pacific flight attendant based in Vancouver. So obviously lived in Vancouver.
Mhm.
And obviously you'd be working that flight a lot, but others as well.
Yeah,
So that was kind of a neat thing
because I
that
suppose then you would go the other way and then you'd lay over in Hong Kong and prospectively do something else.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, just looking at flights that you go on all these sites and all, it's offering like these one stop, two stop, and you see the price, you're like, oh great. But then you see the total amount of travel time is something like 62 hours or
Yeah, yeah,
51 hours. Like, and then you like click on the arrow details,
yeah.
and it's like this long, long,
I
long
mean, I was
layovers.
looking at like flights on, say, like the ITA metrics, and it was like, yes, we got this flight. It's like, well, you've got a 18-hour layover in Paris. It's like, well, that's not bad, but
When do those 18 hours occur?
well, I mean, yes, exactly. And also, it's like, how much is do you value just laying around? And may not be like something like Paris that's relatively easy, but it's like, am I able to get out of the airport? Am I able to do anything? Am I able to get into town?
Exactly. Yeah. And this really, now we're going into hopefully a bit of an advanced traveler mentality. It's like strategizing this because you can have a great time. Every time I've been to Amsterdam, the first thing I do is hope that I have enough connection time to hop on the train and just take a rip into Central and
Yeah,
eat, sightsee, have a beer. And same with
yeah,
Frankfurt.
yeah,
I mean, just Frankfurt main train station is just awesome in itself, just to
yeah.
hang out.
On the
And
inside, anyway.
on the inside, step across the road. Well, you can, but
And
yes,
and I mean, as well, Heathrow's a little nasty these days for connecting and things, but now with the Elizabeth line in London as well,
you're right. The Elizabeth line has changed a lot. Before, if you wanted to
it would
pay,
work.
yeah, you could pay to get to Paddington and have your quick fix to London hit back, but it wasn't
Yeah.
the cheapest thing in the world.
And then during pandemic as well, I mean, Singapore Airlines was working, well, maybe not
They
so
just
much during
brought everything
pandemic, but
to
it
the
was like,
airport.
yeah, well, but actually, so Singapore changed it as well, where it's like, all right, like we'll give you like the layover in
Hmm.
Singapore. So like, hey, grab the MRT and away you go.
Yeah. Although probably in their mind, they're hoping that maybe you're not going to bother and dump your money into the airport investment
Yeah, true.
and all the services there. Yeah. Whereas some, like Kuala Lumpur, the airport's so far out that
Oh gosh.
you'd be really having to make a conscious decision if you want to like leave that airport. And then it also comes into play is visa situations. What kind of passport are you holding?
Hmm.
Is it going
Yeah,
to
does it
work?
allow
Can
you
you
the
do
layover
this? Yeah. Yeah. And then some people also don't realize that their layer is going to get chewed up by a terminal switch.
or an airport
Maybe,
switch?
or well, yeah,
I'm
the
landing at
London
Gatwick and I'm
scenario,
leaving from Heathrow.
yeah, or Stansted or something crazy. So, in trying to look for flights, these are the things you have to kind of keep in mind. Are the connections worth it? Are you just traveling on your own, just ripping it free, or do you have a whole family in tow? What are your logistics? Doesn't make sense. Will a lounge access solve the problem?
There
Maybe,
you
maybe
go.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're putting all this thing together, I mean, yeah, you might be saving a few $100s by accepting some complicated connections, but how much are you going to end up spending to manage through it? You know,
Hmm.
to each their own. Like if they want to walk around and lie on an airport bench, sure, but perhaps you want to get an airport hotel, or I think we mentioned before, like in it was Dallas, I had this 4 hour resting pod type experience. Everything costs money
Yeah.
along the way. Food, a bit of drink, whatever you want to do. Or, we just talked about running into a city. That's good. It's great travel experience, but it's going to cost you money. So
Yeah,
when you add the whole thing together, are you now spending more than just buying a cheaper direct flight?
true. And in some cases, though, it's like because airlines allow it, are two one ways cheaper.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You
Uh,
go out via one, and then maybe you're in a different alliance or whatever on the way back.
exactly. And it's funny. Back to that business trip that I'm doing out your way in June. That's what I've done. I've had to take two. I've done WestJet on the way out and Air Canada on the way back.
Okay.
Timing,
And are they both
pricing.
connecting in Toronto, or is the one direct to London?
The one going out is connecting in Calgary.
Okay.
But just purely based on timing, I had to take that in order to make it for the conference that I'm attending.
Okay.
Because the other airline just would get me in an hour late.
Yeah.
Whereas coming back, departure time, etc., price, Air Canada was the way to go. So yeah, just
And I know, I mean, London to Toronto is 200 kilometers ish, I think, off the top of my head, maybe a little bit more. But essentially, I remember flying in December last year when flights were crazy with weather and everything. Actually, flying last summer when everything was crazy, there was a bunch of people like the flights to London got all screwed up, and they're like, "Well, there's no flights today and no flights to London until 2 days from now." So it's like, yeah, go take a bus, go take a cab, go take something because
mm-hmm. You're not getting
you're
out.
not going to get anywhere. So, and
Yeah,
sometimes
sadly,
that also
these like
happens when you're flying to say like connecting to a small airport where it's like, all right, if things go bad and things go sideways, and hopefully less this summer than last, is it easy? I mean, if you haven't checked in bags and your bags are available, do you just
exactly
say to
just
heck with it and
leave.
just leave, take a train, take a bus, take a whatever, rent a car?
Absolutely. And that brings us all the way back to episode, was it 3 or 4 or 5 of patching
Yeah,
um
patching tickets when you were trying to get
patching
from
tickets.
yeah, down to Brazil, right?
Yeah, exactly. With the wild car rentals tale.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of wraps it up. I think, as we're kind of planning our summers, we'll kind of check back and see where we've landed on what we're going to be doing.
Hmm.
I think your travel plans are a bit more solidified,
Yeah, I mean, I
but
have tickets and just waiting anxiously to see if I get emails to tell me that they're not what I thought they were.
yeah, who knows? It's going to be a strange one. I think last year the industry just exploded with joy, saying, "Oh,
Yeah.
let's just go for it." And airports weren't ready. All the regulations suddenly dropped into place, sort of late summer, going into the
Yeah.
fall, and now we're coming back with a bit more realistic
Well,
pattern.
and I was hearing, I can't remember which podcast it was, but they were talking about, airlines trying to figure out historical factors. It's like, well, they don't have history for the last couple of years, so
Yeah, you
they're
almost have to
throwing
dial
darts in
back
the dark.
to 2019. Really, is the last time you could peg it.
But even that, it's like, but you can't use that stat anymore because it's hardly accurate
Yeah,
anymore either. You don't know if people are going to be still flying that one. So,
yeah, yeah. Some airlines don't exist.
or
Some
capacity, or and
provisions.
all the other factors that are involved that didn't exist in 2019. So it's like, all right, yeah, sure, passenger numbers say that this route should have a lot of people, but what's our optimal number of planes or price or whatever
Mm-mm.
or size or that kind of thing?
I can't imagine like someone like BA. I mean, they took the entire 747 fleet out. It's gone,
Yeah,
which was a major part of their operation
yeah.
pre-pandemic,
And now they're bringing back their 380s, and
which is even bigger. But
yeah.
it's
But
just a
yeah, I mean,
different.
there's they were looking at things and they're like, oh, we don't need these planes anymore because they cost too much. But it's like, well, but now we need these planes, but now we don't have the
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
or we don't have crew who's got flight hours on bigger wide body planes or whatever, and
now there's training, etc. Exactly. Yeah.
and different airlines around the world all bidding up and saying, oh, you can fly a wide body, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
If you're liking this episode experience, you may also enjoy Experience 24 Into the Mailbag, Part 1. in-flight meal service, and free overnight accommodation. It's available wherever you listen to your podcasts.
So speaking of BA, we can go into a bit of news we found.
All right.
I got something from Simple Flying, the British Airways food playlist. So it's a story of British Airways. They're doing something called sensory menus. They're pairing music with food. Sounds a bit strange, right? So what they've done is for the food that you're going to eat, you can listen to a playlist of music for each course. And it's supposed, in theory, may enhance the flavor of the food and drinks that it's being paired with. Now, is this kind of more towards premium class? I don't know. We'll see. But they're going to have, different menus out of the different destinations or origin cities.
Mm-hmm.
And it would concentrate on a flavor. So, as an example, for its Scottish salmon, they're going to be having Paolo Nutini with a song called Scream. And in there's a lot of lines about Scottish singers make Scottish food taste better.
Okay.
So, for savory starters, they have the Johnsons' Crazy in Love, or Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington with Azalea. And their low tones complement the dishes. So, yeah, we'll see. This is a bit of a stretch, but something kind of funny and different.
To be fair, I mean, there are certain playlists that I'd rather listen to when I'm eating on a flight than other playlists.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, long haul, I'm usually watching a movie or something, but I'd listen to music if that was part of the experience. Absolutely. Let's give it a whirl. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And since we were talking about Australia and New Zealand before, something I found here on Flyer Talk, that United reveals his historic expansion of service in South Pacific. So starting in the northern winter 2023, United will add 40% more flights between the mainland US and Australia and New Zealand, including the first nonstop service between San Francisco and Christchurch. And so what's going to happen, they're increasing flights between Los Angeles, San Francisco, Brisbane, Auckland, size of planes to Sydney and Melbourne as well. And so essentially they're going to operate 66 flights a week between the US and Australia and New Zealand. So a year-on-year increase of 40%.
That's huge. That's massive.
And then also because they have partnerships with Air New Zealand and Virgin Australia, easy connections from cities served by United to an additional 50 regional destinations.
See, all that stuff we talked about with the Honolulu thing, what you
they just moved it further west in the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. This wouldn't have existed. Yeah, hilarious, and that's incredible. And this shows like technology and aircraft range, how it all comes into play, and that's awesome. Like San Francisco to Christchurch, who would ever have thought that as a connection? And the spin-off effects on tourism and whatnot.
And with Project Sunrise, I mean, goodness knows, I mean, you'll be doing, let's say, like London to Sydney, as opposed to what exists now outside of Perth. I mean, you've got the Kangaroo route that stops in Singapore, for example, or Mideast. You're going to have a nonstop all the way over, or say JFK to Auckland.
You're right. Yeah. Sorry, we're going backwards in our episode here. We never did talk about the Europe to Asia runs and how they all, we did talk about how they all stopped in the Middle East. And there was one pivotal, critical moment of that entire system that didn't go very well. And this is when Iraq invaded Kuwait.
Yes.
Right. I think most carriers diverted and went to, I don't know, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, whatever.
Yeah.
But British Airways opted to go in because Kuwait was the tech stop city at that time.
Okay.
So they did go in. And small tidbit of info, my aunt and cousins were on that flight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And were hostages.
Oh, yikes.
number of months, I guess it was. Yeah. Big sensitive topic in the family.
Yes, no kidding.
Yeah. But that's because the plane just, well, A, couldn't have range to make the full flight all the way to Singapore.
Hmm.
Had to land it. I'm sure there's a whole debate and controversy as to why did the British Airways pilot opt to go into Kuwait. Did he have all the information and facts in front
Yeah.
of him? Or what to happen? Who knows? That's not for us to discuss here. But it goes to show how history and airline routes and milk runs have had an interesting
Well,
intertwining.
and your comment, I mean, last February when you were coming back, from Qatar, being the first day of Russia invading Ukraine and having to do the massive
Yeah, the
reroute
diversion.
around, hang a left at Turkey and then make the
Yeah, exactly.
take extra
Yeah,
time to make your route.
yeah. I'm so glad I captured that picture from the IFE. That'll be one for the history books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, we have diverted and come back.
Excellent. Yeah, so that wraps up experience 72 of the Seat 1A podcast. If you liked this podcast experience, be sure to rate us and subscribe. Tell your friends and fellow travelers about us. Make sure you visit us at podcast.seat1a.org for complete show notes. That's Sierra Echo Alpha Tango, the number 1 alpha.org. Feedback, addenda, letting us know where we've messed up. You can send all of that to stories, STORIES, at seat1a.org. If you'd like to support the show financially, we have a page at Patreon, patreon.com/seat1a. Links are included in the show notes.
And here's what we can look forward to in upcoming C1A podcast experiences. We're going to go back to the hotel discussion and look at airport hotels in further depth, take a refresh on ticketing, and we're trying to line up some interesting interviews from some of our fans. As always, we look forward to hearing your stories. If you have an interesting travel experience or crazy question, please do get in touch and we'll see how we can bring it into one of our episodes.
Excellent. So until the next time, I'm Jeff. Thanks for listening.
And I'm Vinod. You're cleared for takeoff. Have a great flight.